Internally, externally, eternally. How can we drink from the fountain of youth and live a long, healthy life?
Yeah, that's right. We're joined by Montecito resident, former board-certified surgeon, and podcast host. He has 3 podcasts. We're joined by Dr. Buck Joffrey. Good morning, and thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. We're talking about longevity.
Yep.
So we're going to go through a couple of different topics that you shared with us. First and foremost, on social media these days, there are so many different trendy diets. So many different fads that people want to follow. Carnivore diet, keto diet, everything. So you're a longevity expert. What do people need to include in their diet to live a long, healthy life?
Yeah, so I think the key things here to think about, there's all sorts of different diets out there, and people get really excited about one or another, almost like it's a religion. But the reality is, what we know is there's a couple of major things to think about. In order to maximize your longevity, you're going to need to decrease the amount of sugar that you take in. And I'm not talking about sugar that comes from vegetables, things like that, but added sugar and processed foods are probably going to be the biggest thing. The idea is basically to keep your blood sugar nice and level. If you don't do that, that's when a lot of the disease processes start to develop. So that's one big one. The other one is protein. Now, this is particularly important for older people. Most people don't get enough protein, and one of the biggest causes of we call it morbidity or mortality, people falling, things like that, even really just any kind of disease, is the loss of lean muscle mass as we get older. Naturally, frankly, as early as late 30s, you start losing muscle mass, and you've got to counteract that with eating more protein. So a gram per pound is what a lot of people are now recommending. Now, that's an awful lot of protein, but if you can try to do a little bit more, that's going to be helpful.
Okay.
All right, talk about the cardio, where people kind of get a lot of attention focused on running and cardio, but you're talking more weightlifting should be implemented.
Yeah, there's 2 things I would say. The number one variable in determining longevity right now that we have is something called VO2 max, and that's essentially how useful or how efficiently you use oxygen. Now, cardio is great, but one thing that's even better than that is high intensity interval training. Essentially, what that does is it increases that VO2 max, which again we know is really the number one variable that determines how long you're going to live. The other thing is weightlifting, and again, this goes back to all of that muscle loss that we talked about, taking in more protein and also being able to put it into muscle, right? So weight training is extraordinarily important. Again, lean muscle mass is probably right up there with VO2 max in determining how long you're going to live.
Yeah, and one thing that us morning news folk are very familiar with is sleep or lack thereof. Is 8 hours still kind of that baseline, or do different people need a different amount of sleep, or how do you determine that?
There is some variance in terms of how much people need to sleep, but the problem is it's not just how much sleep, but it's the quality of sleep, okay? And 2 things I like to point out. There's 2 major types of sleep that are really important: deep sleep and REM sleep. Deep sleep is something that you're going to mostly get before midnight. So if you're somebody who sleeps later than that, you're not going to get as much of that. Now, that's important because deep sleep actually is a time when the brain contracts a little bit and a lot of things clean it out and prevents things like Alzheimer's. And people who get less deep sleep tend to get dementia more frequently. REM, the second half of the night after midnight, is you're going to get more of that after midnight, and that's going to help with emotions and that kind of thing. So if you're waking up really early and you get really cranky, that might be why.
Yeah, I wake up at 2 in the morning for this job. Joya wakes up early, has a long commute too, so you got to get more of that.
Yeah, we'll get to that once we shift into a different career or something like that. Age reversal, are we nearing that becoming a reality?
Yeah, so here's the thing, is it sounds scientific, it sounds like science fiction, right? But here's the thing, fundamentally, a lot of scientists are now looking at aging as a disease. We didn't used to look at it as a disease. We looked at it as something that was inevitable. You're just kind of falling apart, right? But instead of looking at, aging as inevitable, we're starting to look at that as a primary disease rather than cancer, rather than cardiovascular disease, all these things that happen as the result of the aging process. And what we're finding in the lab is there are certain genes that are involved in the aging process. There's a reason why whales can live 500 years, because they have more of certain genes that we don't have. We have less of them. So fundamentally, what you could theoretically do is start triggering those genes to reverse the aging process or significantly slow it down. And right now we're seeing it. Some scientists are reporting that they're actually have already done it in rodents. Literally reverse biological age in rodents already. So if they can do it in the animals, it's not going to be something that we can't do.
We're living in the future.
We are.
It's amazing. And I mean, you talk about this. I mean, you have 2 podcasts dedicated to longevity.
Yep.
So we unfortunately do have to wrap up. But our viewers, if you're interested in more of this, you'll definitely want to check out your 2 podcasts. We'll have a link to all of that information and much more on our mobile app and website. This is such an interesting conversation. We've enjoyed this so much, Dr. Buck Joffrey. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.